So I've finally done it. I've beaten Dark Souls 2.
Yeah!
The game in the series that gets the most hate.
No.
And many players have recommended for me to skip. In this video, I wanted to talk about my honest opinions and how I really feel about Dark Souls 2. Still riding the hype from clearing Dark Souls Remastered and experimenting a little bit in New Game Plus, I was feeling in tune with my Souls reflexes and ready for more. And right out of the gate with Dark Souls 2, I was feeling very unsure. Because honestly, right from the start, Dark Souls 2 does feel different. The graphics, the movement, the healing system, the hollowing effect differences, world design, enemy behaviors, enemy placement, and even the mob size. To me, it felt like Dark Souls 1 had trained me for something else entirely, like I had learned to play high-level volleyball with Dark Souls 1, and then mistakenly signed up for a professional dodgeball tournament with Dark Souls 2. So I do understand why right off the bat, many players turn away. The start of this game to me felt significantly harder than Dark Souls 1, because it wasn't what I expected. It didn't match up with what I thought it was going to be. But in my opinion, in some pretty big ways, this actually is a good thing, which I'm going to get into more later.
Adaptability.
Early on in my playthrough, I noticed that my dodge felt off, like I was not getting my iframes where they needed to be, and that I was dying to things that had no business killing me. This is where the infamous adaptability comes into play. I did some research and found that your character in Dark Souls 2 starts the game lacking in agility and with decreased dodge rolling ability. The solution for this is leveling up adaptability to around 23-ish, until your agility is around 100. Then it feels normal. Your character's back in shape and ready to roll. I personally did not enjoy this change. The reason being, I felt locked into prioritizing this stat over the typical ones that I usually level in Souls and Souls-likes. I typically put my first 8 to 10 levels towards health or stamina, especially in a very first playthrough. The second priority for me being stamina. So I have a little extra forgiveness when I want to use an attack and then still want to be able to dodge afterwards. And for bosses, so that I can have consecutive dodge rolls when needed. So this change alone did feel discouraging because I felt as though I was putting in extra work just to feel normal.
Just like in real life.
And on top of that, if you played Souls games, you know, each time you level up, the amount of souls needed for a level increases. So when I finally was at the point of being able to level what I wanted, it required more time, effort, and patience.
The Emerald Herald and Majula. Early impressions and expectations.
So backtracking just slightly here, before the adaptability research and fixing the sloppy dodge, I was literally throwing souls into the garbage. Kept expecting there to be a moment where the game gave me a pop-up and told me that I could now level up at bonfires, but this didn't happen. I was probably 2 hours in, at least, and hadn't leveled up a single time. Eventually, I discovered that I made a vital mistake that honestly, I knew better than to make. I didn't exhaust the dialogue of the Emerald Herald and Majula. Majula, which is the hub town in this game, is very different than Firelink Shrine. You're supposed to spend a decent amount of time in Majula, and are also required to teleport back to level up with the Emerald Herald, not a bonfire. And so discovering this reignited that spark that had began to diminish as I was getting destroyed by mobs of starting enemies with no mercy in their eyes. I could finally do something about it. This is another change that I could see steering new players away, even experienced players. Bet there are many players that quit before discovering how to even level up. This is a problem because this game does truly get better and better the further you go in. And yes, I know I've said a lot of negative things so far, but I did actually enjoy this game. Back to Majula. Initially, I expected this to be a place that I would visit a couple times throughout my playthrough. However, when I realized I had to return each time I leveled up, I realized I was going to be back many times, and I'm actually really glad. Majula is very different than Firelink Shrine was in Dark Souls 1. Firelink Shrine, I always felt like I didn't fully trust the NPCs there, and that it didn't really feel like home. It looked beautiful, and it was always cool to return and see a new face or side story, but I was always quick to return to what I was doing. In Majula, the town builds up as you progress, having a blacksmith open up, having a merchant, the laddersmith, blacksmith's daughter, and many more join the town. It made it actually start to feel pretty cozy. And I know in Dark Souls, that's a feeling you don't get too often. But it felt good to return to Majula with purpose, coming back to level up, or improve a weapon, buy life gems. This connected me to the world in a different way than Dark Souls 1 did.
Life gems and the Estus Flask.
Speaking of life gems and healing, that is another major change in Dark Souls 2. Your Estus Flask is a lot more limited than before, and maybe I'm imagining it, but it also seems like the Estus Flask animation is significantly slower, locking you into place for a longer duration. Now, I don't know about you, but nothing feels worse to me than dying while sipping on my health juice. So instead, the game kind of steers you towards life gems early on. The animation is faster, they can drop from enemies, or be found in the environment, and they can also be purchased from certain merchants, eventually, infinitely. So after getting the Estus Flask, only having one charge, and then dying when I tried to use it, I kinda stopped using it until I got Estus Shards and Bone Dust upgraded. Once again, this is a change that could deter players, especially when paired with the next aspect I'm going to discuss.
Hollowing and health loss.
When you are defeated in Dark Souls 2 and you become more hollow, losing your humanity, your health also is reduced each time. This is a mechanic that was very new to me. I've never played Demon Souls, but I've heard that there's a similar mechanic to it. However, this is another change that I really feel like affects the early game and new players. Because if you've never played a Souls game before, and you're trying to gauge whether or not you want to invest your time, a lot of these Dark Souls 2 specific changes could very much deter you from continuing or trying other games. Or you'd make the dreaded move I've made for years with Souls games. When I was frustrated, I would switch games, till eventually I switched to a different game and then didn't return for like a year and a half.
But we're stronger now, getting through them.
With this change, the game does explain early on that these creepy little human effigies can be used to reverse your hollowing and health reduction. But you still want to be careful, because if you ever run out, you can dig yourself into quite a hole.
A dark hole. Dark hole 2.
But anyway, another change I wanted to discuss.
Limited enemy response. Covenant of Champions. And Bonfire Ascetics.
In Dark Souls 2, enemies actually have a limited amount of respawns. So if you get stuck somewhere and keep defeating enemies in that area, eventually they will not spawn back in. This can be a good thing if you're struggling with a section. However, for leveling and acquiring souls, this can be a bad thing and quite a surprise. During my playthrough, I did not really experience this, because shortly after discovering I could level up, I joined the Covenant of Champions. To join this covenant, you follow a small path of Majula that leads to Victor's Stone, and then you interact with that stone. This covenant makes enemies once again spawn infinitely, besides bosses. However, this covenant also makes the game significantly more difficult. Enemies and bosses are more difficult, and cooperative play and friendly summons cannot be used. I stayed in this covenant for almost my entire playthrough, until I was at the boss called the Royal Aegis. I kept getting him down to literally one shot, and then I would get hit by something I should have avoided, and I would die. So I don't know if it's the placebo effect from leaving the covenant, but after leaving, everything was smooth sailing. And speaking of enemy respawns, another important change to bring up is Bonfire Ascetics. Bonfire Ascetics can be burned at a bonfire, and they essentially respawn everything in that section that's connected to that bonfire, including the boss. The reason this happens is because the Bonfire Ascetics actually makes the affected section essentially a new Game Plus section. So each Bonfire Ascetic burned at that bonfire increases the enemy and boss difficulty in that area, also increases the souls gained from each enemy, and respawns the items in the section. This makes these Bonfire Ascetics key for strategizing how you're going to farm souls to progress your character, but this also still requires strategy. You don't want to put a section in a new Game Plus 4, and then realize it's one you have to traverse to get to a new area if you aren't prepared. This can put you once again
into a dark hole.
So now we are going to talk about something you've already seen a lot of.
The combat.
For my playthrough, I prioritized dexterity. My main weapon was the rapier, with a shield on my left side. My secondary weapon was a short bow. Typically in these games, I play strength builds, with a big hammer or a greatsword. But after clearing Dark Souls 1 for my first time using a dex build to do it, I decided that I should stick to dex for this playthrough as well. Rapier was fantastic, quick, and the only major issues I had consistently were when larger groups of enemies were advancing towards me. This is where I was very thankful to have the bow as a secondary. This is another change I noticed with Dark Souls 2. In Dark Souls 1, there were times where there were multiple enemies coming at you, but the fight was paced differently, and it wasn't as overwhelming. In Dark Souls 2, there are quite a lot of moments that I would say didn't feel as fair to the player. Times where many enemies are charging at you at once, and their attacks are overlapping, causing a very quick 100-0 to your health bar. This can be extra frustrating with some of the earlier mechanics I discussed, losing your health on death, and having limited human effigies. So like I said, having the bow on hand to take some enemies out at range kept me from having to slowly crawl through the game, and gave me some combat versatility. I imagine different builds in this game would make it like a completely different experience. I know that's how it is with the other games in the series. I've also had people tell me that Dark Souls 2 has the most build variety by far out of all the Souls games. But like I said, I use the rapier and the bow. I do plan on coming back to do more playthroughs, but Dark Souls 3 is next on my list. I'm not moving on just yet, because there's still some important things to discuss with the combat in this game.
The bosses, and the run to them.
And that's right, we're going to talk about the bosses. The last giant was the first boss I faced, and I felt like the run to him was more difficult than the fight itself by far. This is a trend that kind of stuck around for the whole playthrough. The next fight against the Pursuer actually had me stuck for a little while. Didn't hardly have any points put into stamina, so when he did his combo, I had to eat a ton of damage. Eventually, I discovered the Ballista, and it took care of him pretty quick. For many of these bosses, there was some secret mechanic to discover to make them a little easier, and for the most part, many of the bosses in this game were enjoyable. Of course, many of them required precise dodging and pattern recognition. Definitely just avoiding damage was key, especially against the boss encounters with multiple boss enemies. But I did enjoy many of the bosses.
Really disliked a couple of them,
but really enjoyed a lot of them. I would say most of the bosses in this game were on the easy side in comparison to some other Soulsborne games and Souls-likes. But a lot of the ones that were on the easier side, I would kind of classify as like a traversal boss, not a major boss at the end of a section, but more like a small roadblock. What I really didn't enjoy, as I mentioned earlier, was the run to the boss rooms. Most of my frustration with this game came from getting hit by something I should have avoided in a boss fight, respawning back at a bonfire a mile and a half away, then trying to run back through multiple enemy groups. Typically the enemies on the run back to a boss room would have range damage, mostly bows in the early game, and then bows and magic in the mid to late game. This meant that it was way harder to just run by enemies and dodge my way into the fog door. It also meant that when I did make it back to the boss, I was already stressed and thinking to myself, if I lose to this boss, then I will have to redo all of that. That is not a thought you want going through your head when facing an enemy that can potentially one-shot you. So yes, there are many very frustrating runs back to a fog door that are now permanently in my brain from being imprinted and imprinted over and over again. Shrine of Amana is one that comes to mind right away. All those mages and swamp enemies, and the big knights. I feel like that area was just a punishment for players trying to move too quickly. If I wasn't in the Covenant of Champions, maybe a lot of what I mentioned as negatives would have been different, but I'm not sure.
The world and map design.
Comparing this world and the different areas to the areas in Dark Souls 1, there are many differences. Dark Souls 1 connected everything in a way that felt circular, and I feel that it really encouraged exploring and returning to areas. In Dark Souls 2, yes, Majula is still a central point hub area, like Firelink Shrine was, but I feel like the paths branching out from it were straight out and didn't resolve in quite the same way the paths did in Dark Souls 1. The world in Dark Souls 1 was like a symphony. You went to an area, explored, fought, died, made it through, then eventually found a ladder to kick down to reconnect to an earlier part, or a door to open that would blow your mind, seeing that all the struggles you just went through connected an easier route for you to travel back. Dark Souls 2, from Majula, had mostly linear paths branching out that encouraged players to teleport when reaching an area's end. I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing, but it is a very big change from the previous title. In my opinion, Dark Souls 2 does handle this change very well in many ways. Petrified enemies blocking paths, doors that require a certain key, and the wearable ring that unlocks doors. All of these sort of gave Dark Souls 2 a Metroidvania exploration feel to me. Returning to an area and finding a completely new path to open, that you had walked by many times, it felt good, it felt old school, and definitely added to the world by keeping previous areas relevant.
My conclusion.
So how do I feel about Dark Souls 2? I feel like the start of this game can be a bit rough, but once you learn the changes and get in your groove, there really is an amazing game here. A game with a lot of memorable levels and tricky areas, a game that will keep you immersed and craving progression, and a story that I actually did really enjoy. There were enemies with unique and goofy movesets, like the giant hippo and turtle enemies abruptly body slamming or trying to sit on you. A lot of tension when you're struggling with a part of the game and it decides to send an invader to parry the crap out of you. Bonfire Ascetics, allowing you to replay areas and bosses with higher rewards and allowing you to farm items over again, is something that was a pleasant surprise to me. After defeating the final boss, not being forced into a new Game Plus run, I was thrilled to be able to explore the world more and search for missing items, bosses, or side quests. This game had a lot of changes from Dark Souls 1, some good and some bad, but enough to really establish its own identity. This is why I really do regret not trying this game sooner than I did. As I mentioned, I had many people tell me that it's the worst in the series and not worth a playthrough. But the way I see it, it has enough differences from Dark Souls 1 that now both games can give me different itches that can only be scratched by playing each title. In my opinion, this is the best case scenario. I love both, and I know I will replay both many times. Now I can't wait to do my run, Dark Souls 3, which for many seems to be a favorite in the series. I hope that some find this video helpful, and I hope that this video can reach the right people, the ones who may be on the fence about trying this game. Because to those players I would say, try it for yourself, be patient, and at least play to unlock the first great Lord Soul. Because I think that if you do that, you're going to want to continue. But if not, I would say that you gave it a fair chance. If you made it this far into the video, I just want to say thank you for watching. Down in the comments section, feel free to talk about your Dark Souls 2 experience. Do you love the game? Is it not for you? Are you thinking about playing it? If you do decide to, you gotta let me know your thoughts. Anyway, thanks again for watching, and until next time.